Why does your skin like the bottom of my shoe?
That's what a billionaire's son said to a 68-year-old black woman in front of 300 people. Trent Moore stepped closer, looked her up and down like dirt on his floor.
I can smell the poverty on you. Who let you through the door?
A few guests laughed, but this woman didn't shrink.
Your daddy's money talks. But you got nothing.
His knuckles went white around the glass. Then he raised it and poured it down the front of her silver gown. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him like she could see straight through to the rot underneath. But what Trent Moore didn't know, that single glass was about to cost his family a $900 million deal, their empire, and every last shred of their name. But before we get to what happened next, you need to understand who these people are, where they come from, and why that moment at the Gala wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. Let's start with her, Dorothy Banks, born and raised in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, population 39,000, the kind of town where everybody knows your name, your mama's name, and what you had for dinner last Tuesday. Dorothy started teaching 3rd grade at Pine Bluff Elementary in 1986. She was 22 years old, and she didn't stop for 38 years. 38 years. Same school, same hallway, same cracked chalkboard she begged the school board to replace every single September. She raised her son alone. Curtis's father left before the boy was even born. Just gone. No note, no phone call, no child support. Nothing. So Dorothy worked 2 jobs. She taught during the day, and at night, 3 nights a week, she cleaned office buildings on the other side of town. She'd come home at 11, smelling like bleach and floor wax, and still check Curtis's homework before she went to bed. They lived in a rented 2-bedroom house on Elm Street. The roof leaked every spring. Dorothy patched it with duct tape and a prayer. The hot water heater broke twice a year. She fixed it herself because she couldn't afford a plumber. But here's the thing about Dorothy Banks. That woman never once let her son believe he was less than anybody. One afternoon, Curtis came home from school. He was 6 years old, crying so hard he could barely breathe. A classmate told him his family was trash, said his mama was a janitor, and that's all she'd ever be. Dorothy knelt down right there in the kitchen, held his face in both hands, looked him straight in the eyes, and she said 5 words he'd carry for the rest of his life. "They don't get to tell us who we are." She wiped his tears, made him a peanut butter sandwich, and never mentioned it again. But Curtis never forgot. Now let me tell you what that boy did with those 5 words. At 14, he started mowing lawns, $15 a yard. Every penny went to helping Dorothy with rent. At 16, he scored 1,480 on the SAT, while working 25 hours a week at a gas station off Highway 65, full scholarship to Howard University. Graduated summa cum laude, 2006. Then Harvard Business School, class of 2010. He was one of 11 black students out of 280. 11 out of 280. Let that sit for a second. After Harvard, Goldman Sachs hired him. 6 years later, he made vice president, age 32, one of the youngest black VPs in the firm's history. But Curtis didn't stay. In 2016, he took $3.5 million of his own savings, every dollar he had, and started his own firm, Meridian Capital Ventures. 1 employee, 1 desk, 1 phone. By 2024, Meridian managed $1.8 billion in assets, 62 employees, offices in New York and Atlanta. Curtis Banks, the kid from the leaky house on Elm Street, was now worth $220 million. And you know what he still did every single night? called his mama. 9 o'clock sharp. Never missed. Dorothy still lived in Pine Bluff. Curtis begged her to move, offered to buy her any house she wanted. She said no every time. "This is where I built my life. I'm not leaving." That was Dorothy, but there was one thing Curtis never told his mother, the real reason he'd spent 8 years building Meridian into a powerhouse. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like one of those feel-good stories. Kid grows up poor, works hard, makes it big. Hang on, because what happens next is anything but feel-good. Let's talk about the other side. Greenwich, Connecticut. The Moore Estate. 14,000 square feet, 6 bedrooms, a private dock on Long Island Sound, and a wine cellar with 2,200 bottles, most of them older than the people who drank them. Harrison Moore III, 4th-generation money. His great-grandfather built the family fortune in cotton shipping back in the 1920s, and if you know anything about cotton and shipping in the American South in the 1920s, you already know exactly what kind of fortune that was. Harrison inherited Moore Atlantic Holdings at 31 when his father dropped dead of a heart attack on the 9th hole of their country club golf course. Under Harrison, the company expanded. Commercial real estate, luxury hotels, container shipping across 3 continents. At its peak in 2019, Moore Atlantic was valued at $3.2 billion. But Harrison got greedy. He bet big on overseas port development, facilities in Southeast Asia, distribution hubs in West Africa, deals built on handshakes and corruption. And by 2023, those bets had gone bad. Every single one. Moore Atlantic was over-leveraged by $1.1 billion. The shipping division alone was bleeding $12 million a month. Harrison Moore was drowning, and the only life raft in sight was a deal with a black man from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Now let's talk about the son, Trent Moore, age 34, Harrison's eldest, the heir. Got into Yale on a legacy admission after 3 other Ivy League schools said no. Graduated with a 2.3 GPA. Never held a job he didn't get from his father. Harrison gave him the title of Executive Vice President at Moore Atlantic when he was 26. Trent's version of the job? Show up at 11, leave by 3. Expense everything. In Manhattan social circles, Trent Moore was known for 3 things: watches that cost more than most people's cars, opinions louder than anyone asked for, and a DUI in 2019 that his father's lawyers made disappear. That was the Moore family. 4 generations of wealth. 0 generations of earned respect. So when Harrison's lawyers told him who'd be sitting across the negotiating table, he said 5 words that would come back to haunt him. January 2024. Harrison's CFO walked into his office with a proposal. Merge Moore Atlantic's shipping division with Meridian Capital's infrastructure fund. The deal was worth $900 million. It would stop the bleeding. It would save the company. Harrison read the proposal, saw the name at the top. Curtis Banks, Meridian Capital Ventures. He agreed, reluctantly. But later that night, behind closed doors, Harrison pulled Trent aside and said, "We take their money, we shake their hands, and once the ink is dry, we restructure them right out of the boardroom. Understood?" Trent smiled. "Like taking candy." "Exactly," Harrison said. "Like taking candy." Curtis, on the other hand, saw this deal very differently. He'd studied Moore Atlantic for years. He knew the company was bleeding. He knew Harrison was desperate. And he knew something else. Something Harrison had no idea Curtis knew. But we're not going to talk about that yet. The 2 sides agreed to a timeline, formal meetings, due diligence, a target close date in late April, and as a gesture of good faith, Harrison invited Curtis and 1 guest to the Moore Foundation annual gala. March 8th, the Plaza Hotel, black tie. Curtis accepted, and he brought his mother. That was the first mistake Harrison Moore ever thanked Curtis Banks for making. March 8, 2024, the Plaza Hotel, New York City. The Moore Foundation Annual Gala. 300 guests, black tie, $2,500 a plate. And here's the kicker. The charity they were raising money for? The Moore Foundation itself. That's right. A room full of billionaires writing tax-deductible checks to a fund that paid for their own parties. Curtis arrived at 7 p.m., and on his arm, Dorothy Banks. She was wearing a silver gown she'd saved 3 months to buy. Her late mother's pearl brooch pinned just above her heart. She'd had her hair done that morning at the only salon in Pine Bluff that took walk-ins on Fridays. She was nervous. You could see it in the way she held her clutch with both hands. This wasn't her world, she knew that. But she was proud. Her son had been invited to a room like this. Her son belonged here. The trouble started before they even made it past the entrance. A waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres walked right past Dorothy. Didn't even slow down. Then he saw she was with Curtis, saw the suit, saw the confidence, and doubled back with an awkward smile. At the coat check, a woman in pearls looked Dorothy up and down, head to toe, then back up again. "Are you here with the catering staff?" Curtis's hand tightened around his mother's, his jaw clenched, but he didn't say a word. Not yet. They walked into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet in the corner, the smell of money so thick you could taste it. Harrison Moore spotted them from across the room. He came over with that smile, the one that looked like it had been rehearsed in a mirror 1,000 times. "Curtis, glad you could make it. Welcome, welcome." He shook Curtis's hand. Firm grip, eye contact, the full performance. Then he turned to the nearest circle of guests and said, "Everyone, I'd like you to meet our new business partner, Curtis Banks, Meridian Capital Ventures." Dorothy was standing right there, right next to her son, 2 feet away from Harrison Moore. He didn't introduce her, didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge she existed. He looked right through her, like she was furniture. Curtis noticed, Dorothy noticed, and she squeezed her son's arm, not for herself, for him, because she could feel the tension running through his body like a current. 20 minutes passed. The champagne flowed, the laughter got louder. And then Trent Moore showed up, 3 drinks in, bow tie already loose. That walk, you know the walk. The one that says, "I own this room and everyone in it." He spotted Dorothy standing by the bar, waiting for Curtis to come back from the restroom. She was alone. Trent walked up to her. Didn't introduce himself, didn't extend his hand, just looked her up and down, slow, deliberate, like he was inspecting something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Why does your skin look like the bottom of my shoe?" A woman nearby gasped. A man turned his head, but nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Trent stepped closer. "I can smell the poverty on you. Who let you through the door?" A few guests laughed, low, nervous laughter, the kind that says, "I know this is wrong, but I'm not going to be the one to stop it." Dorothy didn't shrink. She looked Trent Moore dead in the eye. "Your daddy's money talks. But you? You got nothing." The laughter stopped. Trent's face went red. His knuckles turned white around the champagne glass. And then he raised it and poured it down the front of her silver gown. The champagne soaked through the fabric, ran over her mother's pearl brooch, dripped onto the marble floor. 300 people, dead silent. Dorothy didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stood there, soaked, humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, and looked at Trent with an expression that could cut through steel. Then she looked at Curtis. He was standing 15 feet away. his hand frozen mid-reach for a glass of water, his fingers curled slowly into a fist. His breathing went shallow. He didn't blink for 6 full seconds. Then he did something nobody in that room expected. He walked to his mother, took off his jacket, draped it gently over her shoulders, buttoned the top button, leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Nobody heard what he said. To this day, only 2 people know. Then he turned, not to Trent, to Harrison. And then a voice so calm, it made the air in the room drop 10 degrees, he said, "We're done here." Harrison laughed. "Oh, come on, Curtis. It was a joke. Boys will be boys." Curtis didn't respond. He took his mother's arm, and he walked her to the door. 300 people watched them leave. Not one person followed. But what nobody in that room knew, not Harrison, not Trent, not a single one of those 300 guests, was that Curtis Banks had been recording everything. Monday morning, March 11th, 2024, 3 days after the gala. Harrison Moore sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Moore Atlantic Tower, sipping his morning espresso like nothing had happened. His lawyers had already sent over the revised merger documents. Estimated close date, April 30th. As far as Harrison was concerned, the weekend was a blip. A minor embarrassment. Nothing a bottle of wine and a handwritten apology couldn't fix. At 9:15 a.m., his assistant buzzed in. "Mr. Moore, Curtis Banks is on line 1. Harrison smiled, set down his espresso, picked up the phone. "Curtis, I was hoping you'd call. Listen, about Saturday night. Harrison." Curtis's voice was flat. No warmth, no small talk. "I want to make sure we're clear on something. The deal is off." Silence. Then Harrison laughed, that country club laugh, the one that says, "You can't possibly be serious." "Off? Curtis, come on. This is a $900 million transaction. You're going to throw all of that away because my son had one too many drinks at a party?" "Your son poured champagne on my mother." "And I'll make sure he apologizes. Personally. We'll send flowers, a handwritten note, whatever it takes. These things happen, Curtis. Let's not blow this out of proportion." "You're not hearing me, Harrison. The deal is dead. Meridian is withdrawing, effective immediately. Your lawyers will have the formal notice by end of business today." Now the silence on the other end was different, heavier. You could almost hear the espresso going cold. And then Harrison's voice changed. The charm was gone. The smile was gone. What came through the phone was something raw, something ugly. "You're making a very big mistake, Curtis. A very big mistake. I know people on every board in this city, every fund, every committee. One phone call from me, and Meridian Capital will never close another deal in New York. Do you understand me? I will bury you." Curtis let him finish. Then, in a voice so steady it didn't even sound human, "You should worry less about my future, Harrison, and more about your own." Click. That was it. No shouting, no threats, just a dial tone. And the beginning of the end for Moore Atlantic Holdings. Within 48 hours, word leaked on Wall Street. Meridian Capital had pulled out of the Moore deal. No public reason given, just gone. $900 million vanished overnight. Moore Atlantic's stock dropped 8% in a single trading day. 8%. That's hundreds of millions in market value, wiped out before lunch. Harrison's board of directors, 12 hand-picked loyalists who'd never questioned him in 20 years, demanded an emergency meeting. The financial press started calling. Bloomberg, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, all asking the same question. Why did Meridian walk away? And Harrison had no answer, because the truth, That his son had poured champagne on a 68-year-old black woman at a charity gala was not a truth Harrison Moore could afford to tell. Meanwhile, across town, Curtis Banks sat in his office at Meridian headquarters, 36th floor, corner office. The Manhattan skyline stretched out behind him like a promise. His COO, Pamela Taylor, walked in, closed the door. "Curtis, you just walked away from $900 million. He didn't look up. "Are you okay?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned his chair to face her. "My mother taught third grade for 38 years, Pamela. She raised me alone, worked 2 jobs, never missed a single day, never complained, never asked for anything." He paused. "And that man's son poured champagne on her, in front of 300 people, like she was nothing." Another pause, longer this time. "So, no, I'm not okay. But I will be." Because Curtis Banks wasn't just walking away from the deal. He was preparing something Harrison Moore couldn't see coming. Now, you'd think pulling a $900 million deal would be enough, right? That's already a pretty big move. Walking away from that kind of money sends a message loud enough to shake the whole street. But Curtis wasn't sending a message. He was building a case. And what he was about to uncover would make the champagne incident look like a footnote. Here's something you need to understand about Harrison Moore III. This man did not lose. Ever. Not in business, not in court, not in life. He'd spent 62 years on this earth believing that money could fix anything, and up until this point, he'd been right. So when Curtis Banks hung up that phone, Harrison didn't sit there feeling sorry for himself. He got to work. And what he did next, I want you to really pay attention here, because this is where it gets ugly. First came the whisper campaign. Harrison picked up the phone and started calling in favors. People he'd golfed with, people he'd donated to, people who owed him. And the message was simple. Do business with Curtis Banks, and you won't do business with me. That's all it took. Within 2 weeks, 3 major institutional investors quietly pulled their commitments from Meridian's next fund. $340 million in committed capital. Gone. Not because of anything Curtis did wrong. Not because Meridian wasn't performing. Just because Harrison Moore made a phone call. $340 million disappeared with a whisper. Then came the media hit. A profile appeared in a financial trade publication. No byline worth mentioning. Unnamed sources questioning Meridian's stability and leadership temperament. The article never said Curtis's name directly. It didn't have to. Everyone on Wall Street knew exactly who it was about. And the implication was clear, even if they never spelled it out. Curtis Banks made an emotional decision, an irrational decision. The kind of decision a man like him would make. You hear what they were really saying, right? You hear the code? Then came the legal attack. Harrison's lawyers filed a breach of contract claim against Meridian Capital for $85 million. Damages, lost opportunity costs, breach of good faith negotiations. It was a garbage lawsuit. Everyone knew it wouldn't hold up. But that wasn't the point. The point was to drain Curtis's time, drain his money, tie him up in depositions and discovery until he choked. 3 attacks, 3 different angles, all in the span of 6 weeks. And Curtis took every single one of them standing up. But then Harrison did something that almost broke him entirely. Harrison's lawyers sent a subpoena to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, to Dorothy Banks. They wanted to depose her, under oath. The stated reason, and I swear I'm not making this up, was that she was present during the event that precipitated the contract dispute. They were dragging a 68-year-old retired school teacher into a federal deposition. A woman with a bad hip and a pension that barely covered her groceries. Because her son had the nerve to walk away from a man who humiliated her. Dorothy called Curtis that evening. She wasn't scared. That wasn't Dorothy. She was furious. But Curtis could hear something else underneath the anger. Something he'd never heard in her voice before. Exhaustion. Not the tired after a long day kind. The bone-deep kind. The kind that comes from realizing the world you thought had changed hasn't. Curtis told her not to worry. Told her his lawyers would handle it. Told her she wouldn't have to set foot in a courtroom. She said okay. Told him she loved him. Hung up. And then Curtis sat alone in his apartment. Midnight. Kitchen floor. Back against the refrigerator. Holding his phone with both hands, staring at a photo of Dorothy at his Harvard graduation. She was wearing a yellow dress, smiling so wide her eyes were almost closed. The proudest day of her life. And now they were coming for her. Because of him. He sat there for a long time. I'm not going to tell you he cried. I'm not going to tell you he didn't. What I'll tell you is this. At 12:43 a.m., he picked up his phone and called his mama. She answered on the first ring, like she always did. Baby, are you all right? Mom, I'm so sorry. I brought you into this. I should have never taken you to that gala. I should have... Curtis. Her voice cut through his like a blade. They don't get to tell us who we are. He didn't speak for 10 seconds, maybe longer. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator behind his back. Then, quietly, no, ma'am, they don't. What Curtis didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that someone inside More Atlantic had been watching everything, and she'd been waiting 19 years for this exact moment. Her name was Nora Williams, age 52, white woman, Princeton Law, class of '96, chief legal counsel at More Atlantic Holdings for 19 years. On the surface, Harrison's most trusted advisor. The woman who'd sat in every boardroom, reviewed every contract, and signed off on every deal More Atlantic had made since 2005. But underneath, Nora Williams was keeping a secret that would burn the More empire to the ground. She reached out to Curtis through a mutual contact, a man named Gerald Anderson, investigative journalist, worked at The Atlantic. Gerald had been trying to crack the More family's story for 3 years. Nora was his anonymous source. Had been for a long time. Gerald called Curtis on a Tuesday afternoon. I've got someone who wants to meet you. She says she has what you need, but she needs guarantees first. Curtis agreed. They met at a diner in Newark, New Jersey. Neutral ground. Nora wore sunglasses and sat in the back booth facing the door. She ordered coffee. Didn't touch it. She slid a sealed envelope across the table. Curtis opened it. Inside, a single printed email, dated November 2019, from Harrison Moore's personal company account. In that email, Harrison referred to a black contractor who'd bid on a More Atlantic hotel project using a word I'm not going to repeat on this channel. You know the word. The ugliest one there is. Curtis read it. His face didn't change. Not a muscle. He slid the envelope back across the table. How much more do you have? Nora looked at him over her sunglasses. 1,400 pages? Internal memos, emails, recorded phone calls. 19 years of documentation. Curtis leaned back in the booth. Why? And Nora told him. Not all at once, in pieces. The way someone talks when they've been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and they're finally putting it down. She'd joined More Atlantic at 33, idealistic, believed the system worked, believed she could make a difference from the inside. Then she watched Harrison deny a promotion to a black senior manager, a man with 15 years of experience and flawless reviews, and give it instead to a white junior associate who'd been with the company for 8 months. She watched Harrison steer contracts away from minority-owned businesses every single time. without exception. She watched Trent Moore use company funds to settle a racial harassment complaint from a former assistant in 2020. A young black woman, 24 years old. The settlement was $200,000. Buried under a non-disclosure agreement so thick it could have been a novel. Nora stayed, not because she was complicit, because she was collecting every memo, every email, every conversation she could record without getting caught. 19 years, 1,400 pages, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right person. "There's one more thing," Nora said. She leaned forward, lowered her voice. "There's something in those documents about the Moore Foundation itself. Something that goes beyond racism. Something federal." Curtis waited. "I'm not going to tell you what it is. Not here. Not yet. But when you see it, you'll understand why I waited 19 years. She stood up, left a 20 on the table, walked out without looking back. Curtis left that diner with something more powerful than a $900 million deal. He just didn't know yet how dangerous it would be to use it. "All right. I need you to pay very close attention to what happens next, because this is where the whole story changes." Curtis didn't take Nora's documents home. He didn't read them alone. He did what a man with 16 years in corporate finance does when he knows he's holding a live grenade. He called Pamela Taylor. They locked themselves in Meridian's conference room for 3 straight days. Door closed, phones off. 1,400 pages spread across the table like a crime scene. And by the end of day 3, Pamela looked up at Curtis with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Fear. "Curtis, this isn't what we thought it was." "What do you mean?" "I mean this goes way beyond racism, way beyond workplace discrimination. This is federal." She laid it out, piece by piece. The Moore Foundation. That charity gala where Trent poured champagne on Dorothy? The one where 300 people paid $2,500 a plate to feel good about themselves? It was a front. $22 million in inflated consulting fees, paid to shell companies owned by Harrison's brother-in-law. Companies that had no employees, no offices, no phone numbers, just bank accounts. $8.6 million in fraudulent tax deductions tied to charitable donations that never happened. Fake receipts, forged signatures, phantom organizations, and wire transfers. $14.3 million sent to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands between 2018 and 2023. Money that was supposed to go to community development programs in underserved neighborhoods. Money that went straight into Harrison Moore's pocket. Curtis sat there, let the numbers settle. So, the gala was a laundering event every year for over a decade. The guests were cover. The charity was the machine. Pamela leaned forward. "Curtis, if we take this to the Department of Justice, Harrison Moore doesn't just lose his company, he goes to prison. Tax fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. Each charge carries up to 20 years. Curtis was quiet for a long time. "And Nora?" "Federal whistleblower protections. If she files through the proper channels, she's covered. And she could be entitled to a percentage of any recovered funds." "What about the people he's hurt? The employees he passed over, the contractors he cut out, the ones who were too scared to say a word?" Pamela held his gaze. "That's what class action suits are for." But Curtis wasn't ready to pull the trigger. Not yet. Because there was one more piece of this story that nobody knew. A piece he'd been carrying alone for 8 years. Remember when I told you, way back at the beginning, that there was something Curtis never told his mother? The real reason he spent 8 years building Meridian into a powerhouse? Here it is. Curtis didn't stumble into the Moore deal. He didn't fall into it by accident. He didn't get lucky. He engineered it. Every single step. for 8 years. And to understand why, you have to go back to 2016. Curtis was still at Goldman Sachs, senior associate. He was handling due diligence on a mid-sized construction company called Terrace Development, black-owned, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Solid company, good financials, 85 employees. Terrace Development had an $18 million contract with Moore Atlantic to build a luxury hotel in downtown Charlotte. The deal was signed. The permits were pulled. Construction was about to start. And then Harrison Moore killed it, just like that. Canceled the contract. Replaced Terrace Development with a white-owned firm, at a higher cost. A firm with less experience. A firm that had never built a hotel before. The reason? Curtis saw it himself. An internal email from Harrison Moore to his CFO. 6 words. "We don't need that kind of visibility on this project." That kind of visibility. You understand what he meant. Terrace Development went bankrupt 6 months later. 85 people lost their jobs. The owner, a man named Roland Cole, 56 years old, tried to save the company, took out a second mortgage, burned through his retirement, begged banks for a lifeline. Nobody helped. Roland Cole died of a heart attack 3 months after the bankruptcy. His daughter, 22 years old, a junior at UNC Charlotte, had to drop out of college to take care of the family. Curtis went to the funeral. He sat in the back row. He didn't know Roland well, but he knew who Roland was. Roland Cole was Dorothy Banks's cousin. Curtis never told his mother the full story. He just told her Roland had a tough break. He couldn't bring himself to explain that the same people he worked alongside in corporate America, the same system he'd fought so hard to break into, had crushed a man who looked just like him. A man who was family. But he made a vow that day. Sitting in that back pew, listening to Roland's daughter try to deliver a eulogy through her tears, Harrison Moore would answer for this. Every move Curtis made after that funeral was deliberate. Founding Meridian, specializing in infrastructure, building his capital base, positioning himself, year after year, deal after deal, as the only firm with the expertise, the capital, and the structure to save Moore Atlantic's failing shipping division. 8 years. One objective. And now, sitting across from Nora Williams in Meridian's conference room with 1,400 pages of evidence on the table, Curtis finally said it out loud. "I didn't come to this deal because of the money, Nora. I came because Harrison Moore destroyed a good man, a man who was family, a man who never got justice." He paused. "And I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what Harrison Moore really is." Nora looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "Then we do it right. And we do it publicly." They shook hands. No contract, no signatures, just 2 people who'd been carrying the truth for too long, finally ready to let it go. The plan was set, but Harrison Moore was about to make one final move, the kind of move only a desperate man makes. October 2024. 7 months had passed since the gala. 7 months since the champagne. 7 months since Curtis walked his mother out of that ballroom. And Harrison Moore thought he'd won. He called a press conference on October 10th, stood behind a mahogany podium with the Moore Atlantic logo behind him. 12 cameras, 6 microphones. That smile, polished, practiced, presidential. He announced that Moore Atlantic was entering a new phase of strategic restructuring. He said the failed Meridian deal was the result of irreconcilable differences in corporate vision. He called Curtis, without naming him directly, a partner who lacked the long-term commitment this company deserves. He was spinning the narrative, rewriting the story, making himself the hero. Then he took one more step. His lawyers filed a restraining order against Nora Williams, claimed she'd stolen proprietary company documents, claimed she was a disgruntled employee engaged in corporate espionage. Harrison Moore stood at that podium, looked into those cameras, and believed, truly believed, that he was in control. He had no idea the narrative was already written, and it was about to be read to the entire country. October 15th, 2024, 8 a.m. 3 things happened at the exact same time, and every single one of them had Curtis Banks's fingerprints on it. First, the article. Gerald Anderson published a 6,000-word investigative piece in The Atlantic. The title? The Moore Legacy. Racism, Fraud, and the Family That Thought They Were Untouchable. 19 years of documented racial discrimination. Internal emails with language so vile it made editors pause before publishing. Names. Dates. Dollar amounts. Harrison Moore III and Trent Moore. Named, quoted, and exposed. The article went live at 8 a.m. Eastern. By 10 a.m. it had 600,000 views. By noon, 1.2 million. By the end of the day, every major news outlet in America had picked it up. CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times, The Washington Post. All of them. Second, the federal filing. At 8:15 a.m., Nora Williams, now formally protected under federal whistleblower statutes, filed a complaint with the Department of Justice. 1,400 pages. Every memo, every email, every recorded conversation, every fraudulent wire transfer, every fake charity receipt. The DOJ opened a federal investigation before lunch. Third, the class action lawsuit. At 8:30 a.m., a coalition of 23 former Moore Atlantic employees and 8 minority-owned contractors filed a class action lawsuit against Moore Atlantic Holdings in the Southern District of New York. Racial discrimination, breach of contract, fraud. Total damages sought? $450 million. And the lead plaintiff? Roland Cole's daughter. The girl who'd had to drop out of college. The girl who'd buried her father. She was 30 years old now, and she was standing on the courthouse steps with a team of lawyers and a look on her face that said she'd been waiting for this moment her entire adult life. But that wasn't even the knockout blow. At 9 a.m., Curtis released the video, the cell phone recording from the gala. Trent Moore, in high definition with crystal clear audio, pouring champagne on a 68-year-old black woman while 300 people watched. It hit social media like a bomb. 2 million views in 3 hours, 12 million by midnight. It trended on every platform for 6 straight days. Hashtag champagne incident, hashtag Moore exposed, hashtag justice for Dorothy. Harrison Moore's phone started ringing at 8:05 a.m. It didn't stop for a week. And then came the moment Curtis had been waiting for, the moment Harrison Moore had nothing left to say. November 2024, Federal Courthouse, Southern District of New York. Judge Eleanor Davis presiding. It was technically a preliminary hearing on the class action suit, but the courtroom was packed like it was a trial. Press filled the gallery. Cameras lined the sidewalk outside. U.S. Marshals at every door. Harrison Moore III sat at the defense table. 5 attorneys from one of the most expensive law firms in the country flanked him on both sides. They'd spent weeks filing motions to dismiss. Every single one denied. Harrison looked different, smaller. The tan was gone. The smile was gone. He sat with his hands flat on the table, staring straight ahead at nothing. Curtis was called to give a statement. He stood, buttoned his jacket, walked to the front of the courtroom. He didn't have notes, didn't need them. He spoke quietly, the way he always did, the way that made you lean in to hear every word. He talked about Roland Cole first. Roland Cole built a construction company from nothing. He employed 85 people. He was a father, a provider, A man who believed if you worked hard and did right, the system would work for you. He paused. Harrison Moore destroyed that company with one email, 6 words, and Roland Cole died 3 months later. He was 56 years old. Then he talked about Dorothy. My mother taught 3rd grade for 38 years. She taught children to read. She taught them their worth. She raised me alone on a teacher's salary and never once complained. His voice stayed steady, not a crack, not a waver. And on March 8, 2024, in front of 300 people, Harrison Moore's son poured champagne on her. Because of the color of her skin. Because of where she came from. Because he believed, because this entire family believed, that people like us don't matter. Curtis looked at Harrison, directly at him. And for the first time in this entire story, Curtis Banks raised his voice. Not to a shout, just enough that every person in that courtroom felt it in their chest. They don't get to tell us who we are. The courtroom went silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a pen moving. Judge Davis let the silence hold for a long moment. Then she turned to the defense table. Does the defense wish to respond? Harrison's lead attorney leaned over, whispered something in Harrison's ear. Harrison didn't move. His eyes were locked on the table in front of him. His lips were pressed together so tight they'd gone white. 10 seconds passed. 15. 20. The lead attorney straightened his tie, cleared his throat. No, Your Honor. No response at this time. That was it. The most powerful man in the room, the man who'd controlled a $3.2 billion empire, the man who'd built his whole life on the belief that his money, his name, and his skin made him untouchable. And he had nothing to say. But justice wasn't done yet, not even close. The reckoning came fast, and it came from every direction. Harrison Moore III was indicted on 14 federal counts. Wire fraud, tax fraud, money laundering. He faced up to 45 years in federal prison. His passport was surrendered the same day. Trent Moore was charged with assault, elevated due to racial motivation, and named as a co-defendant in the class action suit. His personal assets were frozen. Every account, every property, every watch. Moore Atlantic Holdings was placed under federal receivership. The $3.2 billion empire, 4 generations of wealth built on cotton money and cruelty, was being dismantled, piece by piece. Harrison was expelled from 3 corporate boards, 2 country clubs. The Yale Alumni Association sent a letter. He wasn't welcome anymore. Trent's wife filed for divorce within 30 days. She took their children to her parents' home in Vermont. She didn't leave a note. Nora Williams received a $6.8 million federal whistleblower award. She donated half of it to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. She said it was the first good night's sleep she'd had in 19 years. The class action settled for $320 million. Roland Cole's daughter received $4.2 million. She used it to restart her father's construction company. She named it Cole and Daughters. The 23 former employees received settlements ranging from $1.5 million to $8 million each. 23 people who'd been told to be quiet. 23 people who finally got to be loud. A documentary crew started filming the following month, working title, The Champagne Incident. And Curtis Banks? He took $25 million of his own money and established the Dorothy Banks Foundation, a fund dedicated to supporting minority-owned businesses in the infrastructure sector. Dorothy cut the ribbon at the launch event. She was wearing her silver gown, a new one bought by her son, and pinned just above her heart, the same pearl brooch her mother gave her. Dry this time. Here's the thing about this story that stays with me. It wasn't the money that broke Harrison Moore. It wasn't the lawyers. It wasn't the federal indictment or the headlines or the hashtags. It was the fact that he spent his entire life believing he was untouchable, and one woman's son proved him wrong. Not with anger, not with violence, not with some loud, dramatic scene. With patience, with preparation, and with the truth. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where someone looked right through you? Like you didn't exist? Like you didn't deserve to be there? Have you ever had someone pour champagne on your dignity? Maybe not literally, but you know exactly what I mean. And have you ever wished, just once, that the person who did it had to face what Curtis Banks made Harrison Moore face? Dorothy Banks taught 3rd grade for 38 years. She taught children that every voice matters, that every person has value, that nobody, no matter how rich, how powerful, how loud, gets to tell you who you are. And her son proved it. If this story hit you the way it hit me, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And drop a comment. Tell me about a time someone underestimated you. I read every single one. Because we don't tell each other's stories enough. And the more we do, the harder it gets for the Harrison Moores of this world to hide. I'll see you in the next one.